Om. Om. Om Sahana Bhavatu Sahanao Bhunaktu Saha Viryam Karavavahai Tejasvinavadhitamastu ma vidvishavahai. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Samasta Jana Kalyane Niratam Karunamayam Namami Chinmayam Devam Satgurum Brahma Vidvaram. Namah Shri Shankarananda Guru Padambujanmane Savila Maha Graha Grasaika Karmane. Okay, so today we're going to see the summary of the entire chapter 3 of Panchadashi, just so that we have the whole thought flow in our minds. So I'm going to share some slides, and through those slides, we'll get an idea of the whole chapter. Okay, so give me a second. All right, can you all see my screen? Yes? Okay, great. Okay, so here we go. This is Pañcakośa Viveka, chapter 3 of Panchadashi. And Pañcakośa Viveka, here Viveka means differentiation. The differentiation of one sheath from another, but mostly the differentiation of the 5 sheaths from the self. Now here we have several topics that we're going to take up, or several topics that were expounded upon. So we have Brahman within the cave of the heart. We have the 5 sheaths. So this is topic 1. This is topic 2. Third topic was an objection and an answer. The 4th topic was Jñānam, or the self as the nature of consciousness. The 5th topic was Satyam, or the self as the nature of existence. And then the 6th topic was Anantam, self as the nature of bliss. And then the final topic is just the conclusion and the palashruti, or the fruit of this realization, which is that being is free here and now. So we'll start with the first part. This chapter opens up saying that Brahman is hidden in the cave, is as though hidden, right? Not exactly hidden, but as though hidden. And the cave here symbolizes the 5 sheaths. And why this cave, this example of cave is given because cave is something that veils something inside it, right? It's so if you look at this cave, it's as though veiling whatever else is inside it. And the cave also tells you that you have to go inside. There is something there. So it's veiling. At the same time, there is something there. And although it appears hidden, entry is possible. So in all of the caves, there's an entry. So entry is possible. And to really see what's in the cave, we need light. So here, to really see what's in the cave of our hearts, we need knowledge. So these 5 sheaths are as though veiling the self. And if we go inside, meaning when we analyze each one and negate it, we enter into the cave. And when we enter through knowledge, then it brings to our attention exactly what's within us. That which is within us is none other than Brahman. And that which is within us is also that which is all-pervading. Now, the 5 sheaths are the cave. So first he goes to explain what the 5 sheaths are. In a very simple way, he gives the definition and then the negation for each. So the first sheath is Annamaya-kośa, or food sheath. And very simple, it is food sheath is that which is the body, because it's made out of food. It's produced from food, it's sustained by food, and when it dissolves, when the body dies, it goes to food. So this body is just food, food, food. That's all it is. Now, he says here that we cannot be the body because it's not there before birth and it's not there after death. What does this mean? So here we have these 2 defects. The first one is called akrita abhyagama dosha, meaning if we have a body right now, there must be a reason why we have this body. There must be a reason why we have it in a certain shape or form or size or way, or that we were born in a certain place. There must be a reason. And therefore, it cannot be random. So if we say that we are the body, then how can we justify how this body came to be? Something had to cause it to make it appear as it is. So if we are saying that we are the body, then we are an effect, but without any prior cause. And at the same time, if we say that we are the body and nothing exists after death, there's nothing after death, then there's the krita vipranasha dosha, which means that there's a defect of cause without an effect. I did so many things, I desired so many things, I acted in so many ways, and I have to reap those results. So if I don't exist after death, if this body doesn't exist after death, who is going to reap those results? Every action has a consequence. Every action has a result. So what is going to receive those results? So therefore, we cannot be the body. We're something beyond the body, because there's something that caused the body to be the way it is, and there's something else that will carry over the results of all the actions of this body in the event that it dies. So therefore, we are not the body. Then he goes to say, what about Prāṇamaya-kośa? So what is Prāṇamaya-kośa? It's the energy that governs our physiological functions. So respiration, excretion, circulation, digestion, reverse processes. It's that energy that governs all of this. And it's subtle, so we cannot see prana. We can only feel it. You know, when we're sitting for a long time and we feel cramps in our legs, then we know that there's a lack of circulation there. So Prāṇamaya-kośa is something that's very subtle. And though these processes go on day and night, we feel like we could be this energy, but he says no, because it is Chaitanya Varjanat. It is devoid of consciousness. Our pranas, our energy, is not sentient. It's not aware. In fact, we are aware of our pranas. So we cannot be the pranas. Then he goes to the Manomaya-kośa, or the mental sheath, or simply the mind. The mind are our thoughts of an emotional nature, thoughts of deliberation. All of these thoughts are called the mind. And we are not the mind because it is deluded by desires and subject to modification. What does this mean? It means that we have many, many thoughts. joy, sorrow, calmness, stress, anger, compassion. We have so many, many thoughts, and they keep changing. They keep changing. And if we were really our thoughts, then which thought would we be? Right? The thoughts keep changing. So which thought would we be? We can't be every single thought. At the same time, we can't be just one thought because it disappears and another thought comes. But simply put, we are aware of our changing thoughts. Therefore, we really cannot be those thoughts. And the thought, we have thoughts of desire, thoughts of action, thoughts of wanting the results. The self is free from any such desire. So we cannot be the mind. What about the intellect? Vijñānamaya-kośa. So this is that sheath, that layer which has the reflection of consciousness, the sense of I. So when we say I, where is that? It's in the Vijñānamaya-kośa. And sometimes it's known as the ego. And that, why are we not that? Because it dissolves in deep sleep. Very simple reason. When we're sleeping, the ego, the sense of I, dissolves. So we cannot be that. Okay, what's next? The Annamaya-kośa, the bliss sheath. What is this bliss sheath? It's an inward thought. It's very, very subtle. It gives up the object and catches the reflection of bliss. So example that we gave here is, let's say you're eating a nice piece of cake, a nice warm cake in this cold weather. And there's a moment when you eat the cake and you put it in your mouth and you're feeling really nice about it. But there's a moment when you just close your eyes and go inward. You drop the cake and you just close your eyes and go inward. And it's as though you are in some seventh heaven or in some cloud nine. That experience is called Annamaya-kośa. Every time we drop the object and we close our eyes, we go inwards, and it's just peace that we feel. It's Annamaya-kośa. It's the bliss sheath. But we are ignorant that the bliss is coming from the self. We think that the bliss is coming from the object. Actually, the bliss is coming from the self. It's because now the whole thought is free, so it can reflect the bliss of the self. It's not clouded by so many objects anymore. And he gives the reason that this Annamaya-kośa is not the self because it is impermanent. It is an experience that starts and ends, and it has a gradation, so it cannot be us. So if you imagine these 5 sheaths, they're all different misunderstandings. And what we're trying to do is get to the level of each sheath and understand why we are not that. And they go from the gross to the subtlest, from the least pervasive to the most pervasive. And they go from the order of that which is being controlled to that which controls. Our bliss sheath really controls everything because whatever gives us bliss, that's what we tend to want, desire. That's what we tend to act upon. That's what we tend to get. So everything starts from that bliss sheath. When we have a sense that that object, that person, that being is giving us happiness, it drives the whole sheaths, all of the sheaths, and it sends us on a whirlwind. So he says, Swāmi Vidyāraṇya says, you are not any of these 5 sheaths. Now, an objection happened, the 5 sheaths are all experienced. We all experience these sheaths in many ways. But after negating the 5 sheaths, there's nothing else experienced. What you call Atman, the self, we don't experience it. There's no self because we don't experience anything after negating the 5 sheaths. This is the objection. The answer is, obviously, if the 5 sheaths are experienced, there has to be an experiencer. And that experiencer, that ultimate experiencer, is Atman. We've never had an experience in our lives without any experiencer. That doesn't happen. So therefore, there is the self. But what is the nature of this self? So he now goes into the nature of the self as consciousness. And in this particular text, he spent the most time to describe Jnānam, or the nature of the self as consciousness. And this verse is very, very beautiful. I believe it's verse number 13. And it says, Swayam eva nubhutitvat. The self is not experienced as an object because the self is of the nature of experience. It's of the nature of experience. It is the reason why you can experience any object. Any object that you can experience is because of the self. So the self is of the nature of experience. And therefore it doesn't require being objectified. So if you think about a light, a lamp that you have at home, the lamp or light, it enables us to experience everything around our house, our couch, our table, our books, our computers. It enables us to experience everything. But that very same table is not needed to experience the light. The light is needed to experience the table, but the table is not needed to experience the light, because the light is self-revealing. It's of the nature of revelation. So in the same way, the self is of the nature of consciousness. Self is of the nature of consciousness, and therefore it doesn't require to be objectified. It's the nature of experience. It appears unknown because Jnatra Jnānantara Bhavat means there's no other knower than it, there's no other knowledge than it. Meaning, other than that light in the room, there's nothing else to illumine everything. But because it's the source, we forget about it. We tend to always forget about what is least obvious. Things that are always there, we forget about. So the light that's constantly illuminating all of the objects in the room, we forget that that's the source. So in the same way, it appears unknown because it's not obvious to us. And so we forget the source. There's no other source than it, but we forget that. And there's no other knowledge possible but through it. So when we're looking at a book, we get so carried away by the letters on the page that we forget to see the actual page itself. We get so carried away by the painting that we forget to see the canvas. We get so carried away by the movie, we forget to see the screen. So we get so carried away with all of this that we fail to go to the source of all experience. Next, he says, he gives the example of sugar. He says that sugar is something that's very sweet. In nature, it is sweet. and it lends its sweetness to other objects which are not sweet. So sugar will lend its sweetness to milk. Sugar can lend its sweetness to water. Sugar can lend its sweetness to a certain kind of food or meal, and it lends its sweetness to other objects which are not sweet. But it doesn't need anything to give it sweetness because it is of the nature of sweetness, right? So in the same way, consciousness lends consciousness to all, but it doesn't need other things to lend consciousness unto itself. So if sugar is sweet and it is giving sweetness to milk, sugar doesn't need milk to give it sweetness because sugar is the nature of sweetness. So consciousness is illumining the eyes, the ears. It is illumining that. It's lending its consciousness there. And therefore it doesn't need the eyes to lend consciousness to it. It doesn't need the ears to lend consciousness to it. So do you see how absurd it is to say, I need to see consciousness? Well, consciousness is the one lending itself so that eyes can see. So here, just like there's nothing else that can give sugar sweetness, and sugar doesn't need sweetening from anyone, the self doesn't need consciousness from any other thing. It doesn't need consciousness from the eyes or the ears or the mind, because the self is the one lending consciousness. So it doesn't need consciousness from the mind. It doesn't need to be illumined by the mind. So to expect that the self should be lit up by the mind and eyes, which is bestowed by consciousness, by which this mind and eye can see, is a very foolish thing. It's a very foolish thing. He goes on to say that there's nothing to hinder sugar from possessing its nature of sweetness. It's going to be sweet. Even if whether you want to add something to it or not add something to it, it is sweet. Whether you know it or you don't know it, it is sweet. The same way, the self is of the nature of experience. Even if you don't know it or you don't experience it, it's of the nature of experience. There's no loss to it. See, if we say, I want to see the self, we have to create a duality, right? Because whenever we want to see something, it has to be different from you. It has to be different from you. You cannot see yourself. So if I want to see, let's say, I want to see this book has to be different from me, and then in front of me, and I have to see it, right? If I want to see this paper holder or paperweight, I have to be different from it, and I have to see it. Now just think, if the eyes have to see consciousness, the eyes have to be different from consciousness, which means that you would take away consciousness from the eyes and you would keep them apart from the eyes. But if we did this, the eyes would cease to exist because the eyes wouldn't have consciousness. If we want the mind to experience consciousness, we have to take consciousness away from the mind and separate it. But if you do that, then the mind wouldn't exist because the mind wouldn't be conscious. So no matter which way we go about it, we cannot objectify consciousness. Consciousness ever remains the subject, and that is called Jnānam. Whether we know it or not, it doesn't matter. Consciousness is consciousness. Now, from the Upanishads, some passages were given. Like I just put the points here. I didn't put the passages, but a question came up as to how do we know ourselves in deep sleep? Because the senses have slept, the mind has slept, the ego has slept, and yet something was still awake, right? We all know we went to sleep. We all know when we wake up that we went to sleep. But how did we know that we went to sleep? What was there to illumine deep sleep? If the eyes were shut, the mind was shut, the ego was shut, what was there to illumine deep sleep? Deep sleep. That has to be consciousness. And when consciousness shines, the whole world shines. The whole world shines. It is like when only I am able to see things through my mind, through my eyes, then I can illumine any object. Without consciousness shining through the mind, shining through the eyes, I will not be able to see anything. Without consciousness shining through the mind, shining through the ears, I will not be able to hear anything. So it's only because of consciousness that we can have any experience whatsoever. So it shining, the whole world shines for us. The mind and senses have a limited field of knowing. So we also reviewed this, where the senses can only perceive in their certain field. The eyes can only see form, ears can only hear sound, nose can only smell a smell, tongue can only taste a specific type of taste, skin can only touch. So they only can know in their limited fields. But we know that the self is devoid of all of these qualities, such as form, sound, touch, smell, taste. The mind also has its field of knowing. It can only know through thoughts. But we know that the self is devoid of any thoughts. So therefore, there's no way for the senses or the mind to know the self. We cannot disassociate the object from consciousness. This already I touched upon, saying that if we wanted to, let us say, think of consciousness, we would have to separate consciousness from the mind. And if we do that, then the mind would not exist. The mind would be unconscious, right? Because you're taking consciousness away from it. So how will it grasp consciousness? How will it grasp anything for that matter? And consciousness is different from the known and unknown, meaning it is not known as an object, but it is not unknown because it is you. It is you yourself. Different from the known can mean different from knowledge, things that we know in the world, that we know people, we know being, we know circumstances. Unknown means those things which we don't know. I don't know what's there outer space. I don't know what's there in other galaxies. It's different from both known and unknown because it illumines both. It illumines what is known and it also illumines what is unknown. So if I don't know what is there in other galaxies or deep outer space, if I don't know what's there, even that is illumined by consciousness. What we know and what we don't know, both are illumined by it. Then he says, let us say we have this situation or this scenario where someone says, I don't know consciousness. So Swāmi Vidyāraṇya Ji says, to even say that, you need consciousness. So if I say, I don't know consciousness, to say that I need consciousness. So that doesn't make sense at all. It's like saying, do I have a tongue or not? The very fact that I'm saying, do I have a tongue, means I have a tongue, because otherwise I wouldn't be able to say this. So it doesn't make sense to say, I don't know consciousness, because by saying that, you're conscious. You need consciousness. What if someone says, but I still want to experience consciousness? What would Swāmi Vidyāraṇya ji say? He says, withdraw the attention from the object and remain as the subject. So, when we sit quietly, just keep withdrawing from all 5 sheaths. Keep withdrawing from all 5 sheaths. And what remains is you. So it's just a matter of attention. As I said earlier, we tend to miss what's obvious. Meaning we tend to miss that which is there all the time. Like the light which is there all the time, illumining all objects, we miss that. Like the paper that is there in the book, on which all of the writing is placed upon, we miss that. So we miss those things which are always there. We miss those things which are a constant. When something is different, it's loud, it's something different than we've ever seen before, that grabs our attention. But consciousness is that constant which is always there, which doesn't grab our attention. So the main point here is, all we need to do is pay attention to it. Be attentive to it. That's all. If someone says, still the self is not there, Swāmi Vidyāraṇya ji says, then there's no opponent. Because if someone says, the self is not there, then they don't exist, right? They don't exist because there's no consciousness, so that person cannot exist. So therefore, there's no opponent to fight with. So it doesn't make sense. You cannot say the self is not there because then you wouldn't be there. So no one can entertain the idea that they do not exist except through delusion. So if I deny the self as consciousness, I deny myself. If I deny the self as existence, I deny myself. So we can only deny this reality if we are absolutely deluded. So now this concludes the whole range of arguments. The argument was the self is not seen, therefore it is not there. But we have seen that the self need not be seen. It need not be an object, but it is very much there. It doesn't need to be objectified because it is the subject, without which the object wouldn't exist. So then he comes to this concept. If the self is there, then what is the nature of the self? What is the nature? And he says it's not idrik. Idrik means it's not like this. Meaning it's not an object of direct perception. Self is not something we can see, hear, smell, taste, touch. It's not an object of direct perception or pratyaksha. And it is not tadrik. It is not like that. It is not an object of inference, comparison, etc. It's not a concept Remember, it's not something that we can conceptualize. It's not something that we can infer, or compare or postulate. It's not any of that, because it is beyond thought. It's beyond thought. The self is what we call aparoksha. It is immediately and directly and ever known. Because just to see a book, we need consciousness, we need the mind, we need the eyes, we need the book, and we need light. We need so many things just to see this book. And yet we call it direct perception. To know a thought, we need consciousness and we need the mind to know different thoughts, different types of thoughts. But to know consciousness as it is, we don't need a thought. We don't even need the thought, I am. We don't even need that. You just know you are. It is an intuitive realization. It doesn't need any medium. That's why it's immediately. It doesn't need any medium. And it's direct. Nothing needs to intervene. Nobody needs to tell you who you are. There's no intervention of anything. And it is ever known. It's ever there. It is aparoksha. Aparoksha. It is you. It is you yourself. So the purpose of this is for us to understand that we don't need the senses or the mind to illumine that self, to know that self, to try to experience that self as an object. It is not that. It is not that. And that is Jnānam. And it is swaprakasha, which means it's self-luminous. Does anything else need to reveal or illumine the self? No. The example of the light in the room with the chairs and tables and couches, does the light need any chair or any table to illuminate? No, it is self-luminous. It doesn't need anything. We're just trained to experience everything as an object. We're trained to think like this. So when somebody says there is a subject that is of the nature of experience, it's strange to us. It's unheard of. We can't figure out quite what it is. And that's why it takes a very subtle mind to go beyond the mind itself to recognize this. The self now is shown as existence. Because remember, there's 3 indicators: Satyam, Jñānam, Anantam. So Satyam, self as existence. Self is something that can never be negated. So take every single thing that we identify with. Our bodies, our pranas, our minds, our intellect, every single thing, our ego, all of it can be negated. For example, when we move from waking state to dream state, the waking world is negated, the waking identity, the waker, is negated, and the whole waking state is negated. And in dream state, there's something else now. I don't anymore have these gross objects in front of me. I don't have this waking personality, Shubhani. I don't have this whole waking state in dream state. In dream state now, it's a whole different world. Subtle objects created from the mind. I also have a different identity. I have a different body. It's a different state. And when I go to deep sleep, the whole dream gets negated. There's no more dreamer, dream world, dream objects. It is just a blankness. It's just a blankness. So from one state to the other state, to the other state, everything is getting negated. And yet there's something that stays as it is. It is the self. It's the Atman, that which can never be negated. If we say the self were to be negated, who would witness its negation? Has anyone ever witnessed their negation? No. We've witnessed the negation of our bodies and minds and intellects and egos, and even the negation of the world. But we've never experienced the negation of our self. Let us say somebody wants to again tune into this. What do? So he gives a very brilliant example. Let us say we're in our homes, in a room, and we clean the room, and it's blank. It's almost like you just moved into a new place, and space alone remains. What happens is we become so attentive to space. We say, oh my gosh, there was so much space here. I had no idea, because it was so cluttered with so many different objects. I didn't know. I was not aware that there was this much space. So just like in our homes, when we remove objects and then we become so in tune to the space that's there, in the mind, remove all of these sheaths, disidentify from all of these sheaths, and what remains is just the pure self. It's a very brilliant example. To remove all the sheaths, what remains is the pure self. And it's in line with this that the Upanishadic statement, neti neti, has been brought in. Neti neti means not this, right? Because that's the only true way to recognize the self. It is not this, not this, not this. Drop whatever can be dropped. And that which cannot be dropped, that is you. So drop whatever can be dropped. And even the one who's dropping has to drop. And what remains is just the pure self, which can never be dropped, can never be picked up. It is you, yourself. That is the Atman. Now, for some, they may need to sit quietly and do these exercises. For others, they can just analyze it or know it through inquiry. So for example, if you take a bracelet and you doubt, is it gold? Is it gold? Is it really gold? And you go to the goldsmith and he melts it for you. And he says, look here, it is gold. And then you recognize, yes, it is gold. So for some people, they have to sit quietly and do this. For others, they can just do it through inquiry and understand, yes, it is Atman. It is Atman. Now he talks about Anantam, the self as infinity. And what does he say? And this was so recent to us, so I'm sure you will remember. He says that the self is beyond space, time, and object. And that's why it's infinite. Infinite means there's no limitations. It is beyond space. It's all pervading. It's beyond time. It's eternal. And it's beyond object because it is a self, the core of all objects. So it is infinite. And then he says, no, this is actually all wrong. This is incorrect because space, time, and objects are superimpositions on Atman. It's not that Atman is all pervading in space because Atman is not in space. Space is in Atman. It's not that Atman is eternal in time because Atman is not in time. Time is in Atman. It's not that Atman is the self of all objects because it's not in the objects. Objects are in Atman. We say that the pot, right? There's clay in the pot. Actually, it's not that there's clay in the pot. Pot is in clay. The bracelet is in gold. The body is in consciousness. So all of these things are superimpositions in Atman. Because they're superimpositions, they cannot limit or do anything to Atman. Just like the wave cannot limit water. Because a wave is water. So wave cannot limit water. The snake cannot limit the rope. Because the snake is essentially rope. Snake cannot limit the rope. So all of these superimpositions, they cannot do anything to Atman. They can't touch Atman also. They can't limit Atman. Now, the question is, do Jiva and Ishvara limit Brahman? Brahman, Atman, do they limit Brahman? And the answer is no, they are both superimpositions on Brahman. They cannot limit Brahman because they are also superimpositions. It appears like this. The Jiva appears, Ishvara appears. This is due to the power of Maya. And we saw this incredible power of Maya, due to which the whole world is in an order. It's in a cosmos and not a chaos. The fact that there's order in the world tells us that there's a power behind that order. And the fact that there's a power tells us there has to be some conscious entity. And that conscious entity for us is Ishvara with his power of Maya. So due to Maya, all of these superimpositions exist, right? And he gives a very beautiful example. He says, when Brahman, the reflection of Brahman, is associated with Maya, that is known as Ishvara. When the reflection of Brahman is associated with the 5 sheaths, then Brahman is known as Jiva. Like that same point, right? Associated with a small circle is Jiva. Associated with a big circle is Ishvara. But the same point in of itself is only Brahman. Just like a man associated with a son is called father, and a man associated with a grandson is called grandfather. But this is only his referential identity. In his essence, he's just a man. If you take away these references, he's just a man. In the same way, the self is Brahman. If you take away the conditionings of the 5 sheaths or the conditioning of Maya, then the self is as it is. Why should you take away the conditionings of Maya and the 5 sheaths? because they are both superimpositions on Brahman. They are like the snake on the rope. The five sheaths cannot exist without Brahman. They are in essence Brahman. Maya cannot exist without Brahman. Everything is actually Brahman alone. So therefore, even these are all superimpositions. Then finally he says, the one who realizes their identity with Brahman, knows themselves to be Brahman, they are free from birth here and hereafter. Meaning they recognize that even here and now they were never born and they will never die because they are that pure consciousness. So what to talk about next life? That doesn't hold any water. Here itself, here and now, they are ever free. They are ever free. So this is summary of what we have seen in chapter 3. Next week, we will now see Taittiriya Upanishad, the Upanishad on which this whole chapter is based from. The Upanishad where has the three lakshanas or indicators of Satyam, Jnānam, Anantam, Brahma. Okay, so I'll say the closing prayer and then we can take any questions. Om Purnamadav Purnamidam Purnat Purnamudachyate Purnasya Purnamadaya Purnameva Vashishyate. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Harihi Om Shri Gurubhyo Namaha. Harihi